The crime boss married the quiet archivist everyone dismissed until she neutralized his assassins. Park Min-seok slammed both palms on the conference table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. She doesn't belong here. His voice cut through the room like a blade. She's soft. She's civilian. She's embarrassing. 12 of the most dangerous men in the Pacific Northwest stared at the floor. Not one of them disagreed out loud. Nia Whitaker sat 3 chairs down, a book open in her lap, her reading glasses pushed halfway up her nose. She did not look up. She did not flinch. She simply turned a page. Min-seok pointed at her like she was furniture someone had left in the wrong room. Tell me one reason this woman should know anything about our business. The silence stretched until it became its own kind of answer. Then Nia closed her book, removed her glasses, and said quietly, without looking at Min-seok at all, because I already know more about your business than you do. If you've ever been dismissed by someone who didn't bother to look closely, if you've ever sat in a room where people talked around you like you were invisible, then you already understand exactly who Nia Whitaker is. And you're going to want to watch what happens when the wrong men finally push her far enough. Stay with us until the very end. Subscribe to the channel right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a like on this video and leave a comment telling us the city and country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Nia Whitaker had spent 32 years being underestimated, and she had learned something most people never figure out. Being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is the most useful tool in the world, if you know how to use it. She grew up in Tacoma, the youngest of 3 daughters, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a hospital laundry facility, and still found time to take her girls to the public library every Saturday morning like it was a sacred appointment. Nia's older sisters were beautiful in the conventional, attention-grabbing way. Loud laughs, easy confidence, the kind of faces that made strangers stop mid-sentence. Nia was the quiet one, the round one. The one adults patted on the head and said, "She's so sweet too," which was the polite way of saying they couldn't think of anything more impressive to say about her. She stopped being hurt by it around age 9. By 12, she had learned to use it. While everyone watched her sisters, Nia watched everyone else. She noticed which teachers changed their voice when they thought no one significant was listening. She noticed which students cheated, which ones lied, and which ones were genuinely struggling behind the performance of confidence. She noticed patterns. She cataloged details. She filed away small observations the way other people collected baseball cards, not because they were useful right now, but because the right piece of information at the right moment was worth more than almost anything else in the world. She graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in library science and archival studies. Her thesis concerned data pattern recognition in municipal record systems, and her advisor told her it was one of the most methodically impressive papers he had read in 20 years of teaching. He said it quietly, in a small office, with 3 other faculty members nodding. Nobody wrote about it in the department newsletter. Nobody gave her an award. That was fine. Nia didn't need the recognition. She needed the skills. She joined the Seattle City Archives at 24, and within 18 months she had reorganized a filing system that had been broken for 2 decades, uncovering 9 separate cases of document fraud in the process that nobody had caught because nobody had been looking carefully enough. The legal department was quietly horrified. Her supervisor gave her a modest raise and asked her not to tell anyone how she'd done it, because it would embarrass too many people who had been there longer. She asked for a better chair instead. She got the chair. By 30, she was a senior archivist with access to records most people didn't know existed. Property transfers, municipal permits, corporate registrations, zoning adjustments, water and power hookups, building inspection waivers. The entire paper skeleton of a city that never stopped growing and never stopped generating documentation. She could read a shipping manifest and understand a supply chain. She could look at a string of property transfers and tell you who was moving money, in which direction, and approximately how fast. She could sit with a stack of files that looked like bureaucratic noise to everyone else, and hear clearly the story those files were telling. None of this made her exciting at parties. Most of the time, that suited Nia fine. She met Kong Taijin on a Tuesday afternoon in February, which was not romantic, not dramatic, and not anything close to what she would have imagined if she had ever imagined such a thing, which she had not. The meeting was arranged through an intermediary, a woman named Clara, who worked in the city's legal liaison office and who Nia knew slightly from professional circles. Clara called on a Monday, was unusually vague about the details, and asked only if Nia would be willing to meet with a private client who needed someone with her specific expertise in document analysis. Nia said she would think about it. She thought about it for approximately 4 hours, ran a quiet background check using public records, found enough overlapping information to understand that the client was connected to something considerably larger than standard private consulting, and called Clara back to say yes. The meeting took place in a private dining room at a restaurant in the International District. No staff, no background music. A table set for two with good wine and cold water and a breadbasket that nobody touched. Taejun arrived 5 minutes early. Nia arrived 3 minutes early and had already checked the exits. He was taller than she expected, with a lean, contained quality about him. The kind of man who took up exactly as much space as necessary and never accidentally more. His suit was understated and expensive. His hands, she noticed, were steady. His face was controlled in the way of someone who had practiced controlling it for a very long time. 40 years of living had left marks at the corners of his eyes and a quality of exhaustion in the set of his jaw that he was clearly working to conceal. He stood when she entered. She did not expect that. He did not look at her the way most men did. The brief cataloging sweep that assessed and then filed her somewhere in the category of not a priority. He looked at her directly, steadily, with the kind of attention that was either unsettling or respectful, depending on the intent behind it. "Miss Whitaker," he gestured toward her chair. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Kong." She sat. "You were vague about what you wanted." "I was deliberate about what I wanted," he said. "Vague is careless. I was deliberate." "All right." She picked up her water glass. "What do you want?" He sat. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone uncertain what to say, but the silence of someone choosing the exact right words from a set he had already prepared. Then he said, "I need a wife." Nia set down her glass. "Not romantically," he continued, without any apparent discomfort. "My father died 4 months ago. He ran the organization I now run. Some of the older factions believe I'm too young, too isolated, and too—" He paused almost imperceptibly. "Too Western in my thinking to hold what he built. Marriage would demonstrate stability without requiring me to align with another family, which creates political complications I'm not interested in creating." Nia studied him for a moment. "You want a marriage that looks real." "I want a marriage that is real," he said. "On paper and in daily life. I have enough performance in my professional existence. I don't have the energy for more of it in my personal life." "And you want it with a civilian," she said. "Someone with no connections to any organization. Someone who can't be leveraged. Someone whose independence is established. Someone who has their own career, their own life, their own reasons for existing that have nothing to do with me." Nia looked at him steadily. He looked back. "What are the terms?" she asked. He laid them out precisely. She would maintain her career. She would have her own bedroom, her own spaces, her own schedule. He would not treat her as decoration or as a subordinate. He would provide legal protection and financial security, neither of which she needed, but both of which came with the territory. In exchange, she would live at his primary residence, attend necessary public events beside him, and allow the organization to observe a marriage that was, by every outward measure, stable and genuine. Nia asked 3 questions. She asked whether he had been involved in violence directed at civilians. He said no, and she believed him. Not because she was naive, but because she had read enough about the Kang organization before this meeting to understand its particular code of operation. She asked whether she would have access to any information that could expose her to legal liability. He said no, and added that he intended to keep it that way. She asked what happened if either of them wanted to dissolve the arrangement. He named a clean exit structure. 6 months' notice. Legal dissolution handled through his attorneys. Full financial independence restored to her from day one. Nia was quiet for a moment. "You researched me," she said. "Yes." "You read my thesis." Something shifted slightly in his face. "I read it twice." "What did you think?" "I thought," Taejun said carefully, "that the person who wrote it must spend a great deal of time watching people who don't know they're being watched." Nia picked up her water glass again. "You're not wrong," she said. She said yes 3 days later. Moving into the lakefront estate took Nia one weekend and required 6 boxes of books, a specific floor lamp she refused to leave behind, and a conversation with her landlord that was considerably simpler than she expected. The estate was large in the way that houses built for security rather than warmth tend to be. All glass and open angles that allowed observation in every direction, with a staff of 3 who moved through the space with the practiced invisibility of people trained not to be noticed. The grounds ran down to the lake on the south side, and on clear mornings the water was so still it reflected the sky like a second version of the world, cleaner and more organized than the one above it. Taejun assigned her the library. She suspected he had chosen it carefully. It was the room farthest from the security station, which gave her privacy. It had west-facing windows that caught the afternoon light at exactly the right angle. It had shelves that ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls and were, at the time she moved in, almost entirely empty. She spent a Saturday afternoon arranging her books. She was 3/4 through when she heard a knock at the door. Careful, deliberate, 2 knocks that asked a question rather than announced a presence. "Come in," she said, without turning around. Taejun stood in the doorway for a moment. He looked at the organized chaos of books stacked on the floor, at the arrangement taking shape on the shelves, at the reading chair she had positioned 6 inches closer to the window than it had been before. He did not say anything about any of it. "The kitchen staff want to know if you have dietary preferences," he said. "I don't eat cilantro." "That's not a dietary preference. That's a strong opinion." Nia turned and looked at him. He was almost smiling. Not quite, but almost. There was something at the edge of his expression that she could not immediately categorize. "Tell them no cilantro," she said. "Done." He looked at the shelves for a moment longer. "Do you need another shelf unit?" She considered. "Probably. I'll have one ordered." He left. He did not linger. He did not try to make conversation he hadn't come to have. He knocked before he entered, said what he came to say, and went back to whatever occupied the rest of his existence. Nia turned back to her books. She filed that information away and said nothing about it. The first strategy meeting she attended was not planned. She had been in the library for a Tuesday morning, following a pattern she had established within the first 2 weeks. Coffee at 7:30, reading until 10, a walk to the lake edge and back, lunch at the main table. If Taejun happened to be there, and coffee in the library if he wasn't, and then work. Her own city archive files, her own ongoing projects, the ongoing stream of documents that she read and organized and analyzed because that was the shape her mind needed to stay satisfied. She heard voices in the adjacent conference room through the wall, which was not unusual. She heard a door open, which was also not unusual. What was unusual was when Taejun appeared in the library doorway and said, neutrally, "You can hear everything in here." "Clear as a phone call," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You might as well come in then," he said, "rather than pretend." She brought her coffee. The men in the conference room reacted to her entrance the way men in those kinds of rooms typically reacted. A sequence of adjustments, the posture changes, the exchanged glances, the deliberate settling of expressions into neutrality that wasn't quite neutrality. She recognized every stage of it. She had seen it her entire professional life. Park Min-seok was sitting directly to Taejun's left, and he looked at Nia the way a man looks at something he cannot decide whether to find amusing or insulting. He was somewhere in his mid-40s, with a thick, compact build and small, intelligent eyes, set deep in a face that had seen a great deal and chosen to become harder rather than wiser from the experience. He had been with the Kong organization for nearly 2 decades, first under Taejun's father and now under Taejun, and there was a quality about him of a man who had spent too long waiting to be the most powerful person in a room. He watched Nia settle into a chair at the far end of the table. He watched her open her book. He watched her put her reading glasses on. His expression moved through several things without landing on any of them. Nia began to read, or she appeared to. The discussion concerned Victor Han, a name she had encountered several times already in the ambient conversation of the household, always with a particular quality of tension that told her it was a problem not yet solved. The conference room conversation confirmed the outline. Han was moving into Kong-controlled territory, cautiously and incrementally, using the northern transportation corridor as his primary route. Min-seok's position was clear. Wait and watch. Let Han overextend and then respond from a position of strength.
The logic was reasonable. It was also, Nia had already established from 3 days of quiet personal research based on an incomplete map. She read 3 more pages. She lets the conversation fully develop. She let Min Seok commit, firmly and in front of everyone, to his assessment of Han's approach. Then she closed her book. The room went quiet so fast it was almost comical. She removed her glasses and looked at the table in front of her, rather than at any specific person. "He's not using the northern corridor as his primary route," she said. "That corridor is the visible route. He established a secondary route through the East Side Industrial District 11 months ago."
The documents for it are split across 3 corporate registrations, 2 subsidiary permits, and a warehousing agreement that was filed under a holding company name that doesn't appear on any of your current watch lists. The silence in the room became a different quality of silence. Min Seok's voice was controlled but tight. "How would you know anything about property records?" Nia said. "Warehouse registrations, municipal permits, shipping data that's public record if you know what you're looking for." She set her glasses on the table. "Powerful men leave paper trails because they assume nobody intelligent is reading them." Taejun was looking at her. Not with surprise exactly, with something more careful than surprise. "Show me," he said. She spent the next 20 minutes walking the room through what she had found, quietly, methodically, without drama, the way she would have presented findings at any professional briefing. She did not embellish. She did not perform certainty she didn't have. She presented the evidence and let it speak. When she finished, Taejun told his logistics coordinator to verify the information within 48 hours. Then he looked at Min Seok. "Adjust the response strategy. We're not waiting on the northern corridor." Min Seok said nothing. He looked at Nia for one long, flat moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something on his notepad, and Nia, who was very good at reading things upside down and from a distance, could see clearly that what he had written was not a note about the meeting. She picked up her book. She filed that too, and she turned back to her page while the most dangerous man in the room quietly decided that she was a problem that needed to be solved before his boss realized she was a solution he couldn't live without. The verification came back in 31 hours. Not 48. 31. Taejun's logistics coordinator, a compact, methodical man named Soo, who communicated almost exclusively through written reports and had worked for the organization for 11 years, delivered the findings at 6:40 in the morning by sliding a folder under the library door. Nia found it when she came down for coffee. She picked it up, read it standing in the hallway in her socks, and then carried it and her coffee to her chair and read it again more carefully. Sue's verification matched her findings exactly. The secondary route through the East Side Industrial District was real, operational, and had been running for 11 months, 3 corporate registrations, 2 subsidiary permits, 1 warehousing agreement filed under a holding company with a name that sounded like a mid-size construction firm and had never triggered any internal watch list because nobody had thought to look at the construction sector filings for that quarter. Nia set the folder on the side table next to her lamp. She picked up her book. She had been reading for approximately 20 minutes when she heard Taejun's footsteps in the corridor. She had already learned to distinguish his walk from the staff's, a slightly longer stride with less sound than you would expect from a man his height, the walk of someone who had trained himself not to announce his presence. He stopped outside the library. He knocked twice. "Come in," she said. He entered carrying his own coffee. He looked at the folder on the side table. "You already read Sue's report." He slid it under the door at 6:40. Taejun pulled the chair from behind the small writing desk and sat down across from her. Not the formal arrangement, not the posture of a man conducting a meeting, just a man sitting down in a room where another person happened to be. He set his coffee on the desk. He looked at his hands for a moment. "How long did it take you to find the secondary route?" he said. 3 days, she said. 2.5, technically. I spent the first half day understanding the filing system well enough to know what I was looking for. And you weren't looking for it specifically? No. I was reading property transfer records because the municipal filing patterns in this district were interesting to me professionally. I noticed a clustering of permit applications that didn't match the stated development activity in the area. That kind of mismatch usually means something. Taejun was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee, set it down without drinking. My security team has 3 people assigned full-time to monitoring Han's expansion, he said, They've been on it for 6 months. Nia said nothing. I'm not criticizing them, he said, with a flatness that made clear he was at least partially criticizing them. I'm observing that the structure of attention matters. Your security team is looking for movement, Nia said. Personnel, vehicles, known associates. They're watching the thing itself. The paper trail isn't the thing itself. It's the shadow the thing casts 3 steps before the thing moves. Taejun looked at her. She kept her eyes on her book, which she had not actually been reading for the last 5 minutes. That's an unusually precise way to explain it, he said. It's the only way I know how to explain it. He stood. He picked up his coffee. He walked to the door and stopped there for a moment with his hand on the frame, looking at the shelves of books like he was trying to read the spines from across the room. The shelf unit will be here Thursday, he said. Thank you, she said. He left. She listened to his footsteps move down the corridor and then fade. She closed her book. She sat with her coffee going cold in her hand and looked at the lake through the window, where the morning light was doing something complicated with the water. And she thought about the folder on the side table, and about Taejun's face when he'd said, I'm observing that the structure of attention matters. The particular quality of a man recalibrating, adjusting his internal map of a situation to account for information he hadn't had before. She thought about Park Min-seok's notepad. She thought about what he'd written on it. She refilled her coffee and went back to work. But the shift inside the organization happened gradually, the way most real shifts happen, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of small adjustments that individually mean nothing and collectively mean everything. Within a week of the Han verification, 3 of Taejun's senior men had found reasons to stop by the library when they knew Nia would be there. Not to speak with her directly, nothing that deliberate, but in the way that cautious people circle something new, maintaining distance while reducing it, a little at a time. A coordinator named Chaewon asked her, apparently at random, whether she had seen anything in the municipal records about a proposed zoning change in the Duwamish corridor. She had not been looking for that specifically, but she told him she would check. She checked. She found the relevant filing and left a printed summary on the kitchen counter with his name on it. He read it in the hallway and did not say thank you out loud. But the next morning, there was a very good thermos of coffee waiting beside the library door, which communicated the same thing more honestly. A man named Cho, who handled the organization's real estate interests, started leaving documents on the kitchen counter in the late evenings, not addressed to anyone, not asking for anything explicitly, but positioned in a way that made clear they were available if someone with archival expertise happened to notice them. Nia noticed them. She read them. Twice she left annotations in the margins in her small, precise handwriting. Cho never acknowledged it directly. He started nodding at her in the corridor, which was considerably more than he had done before. None of this went unnoticed by Min-seok. He said nothing for 2 weeks. He watched. He held his position at Taejun's left and ran his meetings and conducted his business with the focused efficiency that had kept him valuable to the organization for 19 years. And he watched Nia Whitaker move through his world like water through a crack in a foundation, quiet, patient, inevitable. Then, on a Thursday evening, he made a move. It was small, careful, the kind of move designed to be deniable if it failed. He walked into the library at 7:15 without knocking and stood in the center of the room with his arms at his sides. Nia looked up from her desk without expression. She had heard his footsteps. He walked differently from Taejun, heavier on the heel, with the slight deliberateness of a man who wanted his arrival to register. You've been busy, Min-seok said. I'm always busy, Nia said. This is what I look like when I'm busy. He looked at the papers spread across the desk. She did not move to cover them. Cho mentioned you corrected 2 errors in the Riverside property assessment. There were 3 errors, she said. The third one would have cost the organization roughly $40,000 at closing. I left a note about it. Min-seok's expression didn't change significantly, but something shifted in the quality of his stillness. A tightening, almost imperceptible. Taejun married you for stability, he said, not consultation. Taejun married me because I have an independent life and I'm not connected to any competing interest, Nia said. What I do with my time after that is my own business. You're making yourself indispensable. I'm reading documents that cross my desk. If the information is useful, I share it. You're positioning yourself. Nia set down her pen and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd entered. She had a particular quality of stillness when she was paying full attention, not the stillness of someone suppressing emotion, but of someone who had eliminated every unnecessary movement in order to see more clearly. "Mr. Park," she said, "I'm a senior archivist for the city of Seattle. I have been analyzing documents for 8 years. I did not change what I am because I moved into this house. What I am happens to be useful in this environment. If that troubles you, I'd suggest that the trouble is about something other than me." The silence between them went tight and flat. Min Seok held her gaze for a long moment. Then he looked at the window, then at the shelves. Then he turned and walked out without another word, and Nia listened to the heavier footsteps recede down the corridor and kept listening until she heard the distant sound of a door closing somewhere in the east wing. She sat for a moment. Then she picked up her pen and wrote herself a note in the small leather notebook she kept in the left drawer of the desk. She wrote the date. She wrote the time. She wrote, MPS, third attempt to establish boundary, escalating register, watching Cho plus Jaewon contact. No direct threat yet. Watch the lateral moves. She closed the notebook, put it back in the drawer, returned to her work. Well, the late-night conversation started the way most honest things start, accidentally, and because the alternative required too much effort. It was a Wednesday, past 11, and Nia had been awake since 5 and should have been in bed but wasn't, because the file she was working on had caught on something she couldn't let go of. She heard Tae-jun come in from a late meeting, the particular sound of the east entrance, the brief exchange with the overnight security, the footsteps that went toward the kitchen rather than the east wing stairs. She heard the refrigerator open. She heard it close. She heard footsteps stop outside the library door. A pause. Then the 2 knocks. It's late, she said without getting up. You don't have to knock. I always knock, he said through the door. Then come in. He entered carrying 2 glasses of water. He set one on her desk without being asked, the way you set something down for someone you've already cataloged, their habits, their needs, the small requirements of their existence. He sat in the chair across from her, which had started to become his chair by default, and looked at the papers on the desk. The Kelsey Street assessment, he said. No, commercial shipping permits. I found something interesting in the quarterly filing discrepancies, and now I can't stop looking at it. What kind of interesting? She glanced up. He had the look of a man who was genuinely asking, not performing interest in her work, which was a different look, and she had seen enough of both to know which was which. She turned the document so he could see it from where he was sitting. She talked him through it, not the simplified version, the actual version, with the specific numerical discrepancy and the filing pattern that created it and the inference she was drawing from both. He listened. He asked 2 questions. Both questions were precise and indicated that he had understood the first part before asking about the second, which meant he was following rather than waiting for her to finish. Your father ran these operations differently, she said. At some point that was less a question than an observation. Tae-jun set his water glass down. My father ran these operations the way he learned to run them in Busan in the 1980s, which is a different world from this one. He was good at what he did. The structure he built worked for his era. But it's a different era. Yes. And the men who built their positions under him are still thinking in the structures of that era, he said. Yes. Nia looked at him. That must be lonely, she said. Not sympathetically, just as an observation, the way she observed everything. Something moved through Tae-jun's expression. Not pain exactly. The memory of pain, which was its own distinct thing. I learned early, he said, that anything I care about becomes leverage, so I stopped making it obvious what I cared about. That's efficient, she said, and it costs a great deal. Yes, he said. It does. They were quiet for a moment. The lake was invisible through the windows at this hour, just darkness and the occasional reflection of interior light on the glass. What made you say yes? He asked. To the arrangement, realistically. Nia considered. She set her pen down. I've spent 32 years being the person in the room that people look past, she said, not with cruelty, just with the assumption that what I have to offer isn't the kind of thing worth paying close attention to. She paused. Your proposal was the first time in recent memory that someone looked at exactly who I am, not a more impressive version of me, exactly who I actually am, and said, This is specifically what I need. Taejun was quiet for a long moment. That's a low bar, he said. It's a lower bar than it should be, she agreed, but it's the one that exists. He looked at the window, at the dark where the lake was. For what it's worth, he said. I knew before the Han situation. I'd read the thesis. I understood what I was looking at. I know, she said. He looked at her. You were the only person who read it twice, she said. Most people don't finish it once. He almost smiled. Not quite. Almost. He stood. He picked up his glass. He left, and he knocked on the door frame twice on his way out. Not necessary, just habit. The particular habit of a man who had been careful for so long that carefulness had become its own kind of courtesy. Nia sat for a while after he left. She wrote nothing in her notebook that night. Min Seok's next move was less subtle. He called a secondary meeting, not on the formal schedule, not in the main conference room, but in the smaller room off the security station that the organization used for operational discussions that didn't require full attendance. Nia knew about it because Jaewon had an uncomfortable expression the morning of the meeting that she had learned to read as the expression of a man being asked to choose a side he hadn't expected to be asked to choose. She said nothing to Jaewon. She said nothing to Taejun. She waited. The meeting happened at 2 in the afternoon on a Friday. It lasted 40 minutes. Nia knew the duration because she had been in the library, working, and she tracked the movements of the house the way she tracked everything. Not obsessively, just attentively, in the background of everything else she was doing. Footsteps in, footsteps out, the particular silence that followed. She found out the content of the meeting 3 days later, from a source she had not expected. Cho, who left a folded piece of paper inside the cover of a document stack, he slid under the library door on a Monday morning. She read it at her desk. Min Seok had told the secondary group that Nia was a risk to operational security, that her access to municipal records gave her information that could, in the wrong context, become evidence, that her growing familiarity with the organization's internal patterns, who deferred to whom, which operations ran through which coordinators, which properties were flagged for specific purposes, constituted an exposure that none of them had consented to when the marriage was arranged. He had stopped short of proposing anything specific, but the framing was clear. She was a liability that Taejun's feelings, and Min Seok had said feelings, with a particular emphasis that carried its own accusation, were preventing him from addressing. Nia folded the paper, put it in her notebook, sat with it for a moment. She thought about several things in a specific order. She thought about the 14 months she had spent before this arrangement, living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill with a reading chair by the window and a solid, quiet life that asked nothing dramatic of her and gave back reliable satisfaction in return. She thought about whether she missed that life. She examined the question honestly, the way she examined most things. She found to her mild surprise that the answer was no. Not because this life was safer or easier, it was neither. But the reading chair in the library had better light than the one in the apartment, and the work she was doing, the actual intellectual work of pattern recognition and information analysis, was more interesting here than it had been in 8 years of municipal archives. And Taejun knocked before he entered and had ordered her a second bookshelf, and had said, I knew, before the Han situation, in a way that meant he had recognized her first, before there was any advantage in doing so. She did not think this made her foolish. She thought it made her honest. She picked up her pen. She wrote 3 names in her notebook under Min Seok's. The names of the men she was fairly certain, from behavioral observation over the past 6 weeks, had been in that secondary meeting. She drew a line connecting 2 of the names to specific operational responsibilities she had inferred from document patterns. She noted the date Min Seok had entered the library without knocking. She noted the 3 previous attempts to establish that she was out of place, each one escalating slightly from the last. Then she turned the page and wrote, He's not going to stop. He's going to move. The question is timeline and method. She underlined timeline. But Taejun flew to San Francisco on a Thursday. He told her at breakfast, not asking, informing, which was within the terms of their arrangement, but he told her directly rather than having it relayed through someone else, which she had noticed was his consistent practice. He had a meeting with an associate from the Bay Area syndicate, something related to shipping agreements that had apparently been under negotiation for 2 months and had finally reached a stage that required his physical presence. Sue will be here, he said. and the full overnight security team. I know, she said. He looked at her for a moment. He had a particular way of pausing before he left a room. Not hesitation, but the pause of someone doing a final check of something they couldn't quite name. Is there anything you need before I go? He said. More of that coffee Sue makes, she said. The good kind. He's been giving me the standard blend. I'll tell him. He left at 6 in the morning. She heard the car pull out of the estate gate, and then the sound faded, and the house settled into the particular quiet that large, secured houses settle into when the primary occupant is absent, the staff moving more loosely, the security team falling into the easy rhythms of a routine morning, the ambient tension of the household dropping by a fraction. Nia was in the library by 7. She had 3 active files open and her coffee and the specific reading lamp that cast light at the exact angle her eyes required. And for a while it was exactly the kind of morning she had built her entire professional life around. Orderly and quiet and full of the particular pleasure of information yielding itself up to careful attention. At 8:14 the kitchen entrance opened. She heard the footsteps immediately. And she knew, not from any single specific sound, but from the aggregate of small wrongnesses that her pattern-reading mind assembled in under 2 seconds, that something was wrong. The footsteps were too careful, too measured, the tread of someone managing their noise level deliberately, which the household staff never did because they had no reason to, and which the security team never did in the interior of the house because their training taught them to move with authority rather than concealment. These were footsteps trying not to be heard. Nia set her coffee down. She reached into the left drawer of the desk and took out the leather notebook. She opened it to the page where she had written, "He's going to move. The question is timeline and method." She looked at that line for one moment. Then she closed the notebook and put it away. And she sat very still in the good light from her reading lamp, and she listened to the sound of the house telling her everything she needed to know, and she began to think about what she was going to do next. Because Park Min-seok had made his calculation. He had waited for Tae-jun to leave. He had chosen a Friday morning when the staff was running a reduced interior schedule. He had chosen a moment when the woman he had decided was a liability would be alone and unprotected, and, in his considerable experience with such matters, easy to deal with cleanly and without complication. What he had not accounted for, what no one in that house, in that organization, in that world, had yet fully accounted for, was the particular quality of attention that a woman who had spent 32 years being underestimated had developed for exactly this kind of moment. Nia Whitaker had spent her entire life preparing, without knowing she was preparing, for the morning that a man with no imagination about her sent people to her door. She stood up. She pushed the reading chair back from the desk, quietly, with both hands, and she moved toward the far side of the library with the deliberate calm of someone who has already done, in her mind, the thing she is about to do in her body. And in the kitchen corridor, the footsteps kept coming. The footsteps stopped outside the library door. Nia was already gone. She had moved through the library in under 20 seconds, not running, not stumbling, but with the precise and unhurried efficiency of someone executing a plan they had already rehearsed in their head 100 times without knowing they were rehearsing it. Past the reading chair, around the far edge of the desk, through the narrow service door cut into the back wall behind the third bookshelf, the one that the estate's original architect had installed for household staff access, and that the current household staff almost never used because the corridor behind it connected to the laundry wing rather than anything convenient. Nia had used it twice before. Once because she was curious where it went. Once because she had wanted to understand the acoustic properties of the space, how sound moved through it, where it collected, where it disappeared. She pulled the door shut behind her with 2 fingers and stood in the dark of the service corridor and breathed. 3 seconds. 4. 5. She heard the library door open, heard the footsteps enter. Not 1 set, 2. And the particular quality of silence that follows 2 people entering a space they expected to find occupied. A brief exchange of breath, the sound of something being moved. The reading chair, she thought, being checked behind. A professional habit. These were not amateur men. She had already understood that from the sound of them in the kitchen corridor. The spacing, the coordination, the way they had held their movement pattern, even when the house's acoustic irregularities should have disrupted it. Someone had briefed them on the estate layout. Someone had given them a floor plan or something close enough to one. That information landed in her chest like a stone. She filed it and kept moving. The service corridor ran 17 feet before it turned east toward the laundry wing. Nia moved along it with one hand on the wall, not for balance, for reference, feeling the plaster and the slight variations in it, the small familiar textures that told her where she was in the dark with more reliability than sight would have given her in bad light. She had walked this corridor in the dark twice, on purpose, because she had wanted to know if she could do it without a flashlight. She had wanted to know a great many things about this house. At the turn, she stopped. She pressed herself against the wall and listened. 2 in the library. She had heard 2 sets of footsteps, but the kitchen entrance had admitted more weight than 2 people. The sounds had been staggered in a way that suggested at least 4 entries, possibly 5, in a loose follow pattern. Professional entry structure. 1 to clear the initial space, 1 to follow, the remaining team distributing through the ground floor. 5 men in this house, possibly more, against 1 woman who weighed 162 pounds and had, somewhere between the desk and this corridor, made the transition from frightened to functional that she did not entirely understand but had stopped questioning. She pulled out the small phone she kept in her cardigan pocket. Not her primary phone, a secondary device she had started carrying 3 weeks ago for reasons she had told herself were precautionary and which had now revealed themselves to be necessary. And she sent a single text message to a number she had memorized but never dialed. Estate compromised. 5 entry. TJ unreachable. SF meeting. Need immediate. She sent it to Taejun's driver, a man named Bak, who had driven her to the city archives twice, and who she had assessed, in those 2 trips, as the most operationally reliable person in Taejun's immediate circle. Not the most senior. The most reliable. Then she put the phone in her pocket and kept moving. She needed to separate them. Oh. The estate's ground floor was not, technically, a maze. It was a large, well-designed lakefront home with a logical flow of rooms and a security infrastructure that prioritized observation over concealment. But Nia had spent 7 weeks learning the specific ways that logical spaces become unpredictable when the person moving through them understands them better than the people hunting through them. She knew the floorboard in the east corridor that creaked under any weight over 140, and she knew the 3-foot stretch of carpet just before it that absorbed sound completely. She knew that the window at the north end of the dining room cast a reflection from a specific angle that made the hallway appear occupied when it wasn't. She knew the acoustics of the back staircase, the way sound from the upper landing bounced into the kitchen rather than the corridor, so that someone descending the back stairs sounded, to anyone in the kitchen, like they were moving through the east wing. She used all of it. She moved to the back staircase and descended 1 step, just 1, and then came back up and went still. In the kitchen, she heard movement adjust, footsteps shifting toward the east wing. She crossed the upper landing to the primary staircase, descended to the half landing where the window seat was, and stopped. Through the window, she could see the exterior of the estate's south garden. 2 men standing with the careful stillness of exterior perimeter coverage, positioned at the lake-facing corners of the property. 7 then, at minimum. She recalculated. She had her secondary phone. She had the layout. She had approximately 12 to 15 minutes before the interior team completed a systematic room sweep and realized she was not on the ground floor, at which point they would lock down the staircase access and the dynamic would change entirely. She needed one of them separated before that. She moved back up the stairs to the 2nd floor and into the east bedroom corridor, which she did not use herself and which the household staff entered only for weekly maintenance. She went to the 3rd door on the left, a guest bedroom that faced the internal courtyard rather than the lake, with a connecting bathroom that shared a ventilation shaft with the room beside it. She opened the ventilation grill with her thumbnail, which she had done once before, on a Saturday afternoon, when she had been exploring the acoustic pathways of the house and the maintenance staff had thought she was at the market. She pressed her mouth close to the grill and made a sound. Not a voice, not words, just a sound. A brief, sharp percussion, like something heavy dropped on tile, specific enough to register as deliberate and close enough to the 1st floor ceiling to make it sound as if it had come from directly above the library. She heard the footsteps below adjust again. 1 set, moving toward the library. 1 set, staying. She needed them to separate further. She moved fast, back down the secondary corridor to the linen storage room at the far end of the east wing, where a small window opened onto the inner service courtyard. She unlocked the window. She did not open it. She unlocked it and left it that way and moved back toward the center of the house because an unlocked window found during a sweep communicated a specific thing to a professional security mindset: possible exit route, possible secondary asset, possible the asset was already gone, which would create a problem for their operational timeline and force a decision. She moved into the position she needed. The top of the back staircase, pressed flat against the wall in the angle behind the door to the upper landing, in the specific shadow that the morning light from the east window threw at this hour, which she knew because she had sat here once in the early morning with her coffee when she could not sleep, and had noticed the way the light moved. She waited. Below her, she heard the team begin to reorganize. A voice, low, controlled, in Korean, which she did not speak fluently but had enough of to extract meaning from context. Direction. The word for window. The word for check. One set of footsteps toward the east wing, one set ascending the back staircase. She breathed, slow, even. But what happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean. She would think about this later, in the kitchen with her arm being stitched, and she would be honest with herself about it. It was not clean, and she had not been calm in the way the word calm usually implied. And there had been one moment, one specific moment, when her body had simply failed to do what she asked of it, and she had improvised in a way that she could not have planned and was not entirely sure she could replicate. But it worked. The man who came up the back staircase was large, professional, and completely unprepared for a woman who was already in motion before he finished clearing the landing. Nia did not overpower him. She did not try. What she did was use the door, the angle, and the 3 seconds of disorientation that followed an unexpected close proximity encounter to take him out of the equation in a way that bought her time. She came off the staircase on the opposite side from where he expected and went low and hit the back of his knee with her shoulder, her full weight, which was considerable and moving fast. And when he went down, she used the momentum to get past him and through the upper landing door, and she pulled it shut and locked it from the outside with the interior bolt she had accessed from a pinhole latch that the estate's original contractor had installed as a child safety feature, and which nobody in the current household had thought relevant. He hit the door once, hard. Then she heard him get on a radio. She was already moving. She sent a second text to back. Upper floor, east wing linen room window unlocked. Come fast. Then she moved toward the west corridor, toward the window that looked out over the driveway approach, because she needed to know whether backup was already on its way from outside. She looked out. A black vehicle she did not recognize was parked at the estate gate. The driver's door was open. Someone was standing beside it with a phone to their ear. Nia stared at that vehicle for 2 full seconds. She recognized it. Not the vehicle she had never seen before, but the partial view of the driver. A large man with a specific posture, a particular way of standing with his weight on his left side, the right shoulder dropped, that she had seen every day for 6 weeks across a conference table. She pressed her forehead against the window glass. Her mind went very still. Because the man standing beside that vehicle, on his phone, watching the estate gate, the man who had coordinated this, who had given these people the floor plan and the security rotation schedule and the specific information about Taejun's departure time and the household's Friday reduced staff morning, was not someone she had put on her list of Min Seok's known loyalists. He was someone she had put on the opposite list. His name was Soo, Taejun's logistics coordinator, the man who had verified her findings about Victor Han in 31 hours, the man who left reports under doors and communicated through written notes and had worked for the organization for 11 years, first under the father and then under the son. The man who had ordered her the good coffee. Nia straightened up from the window. She looked at the wall in front of her, plain white plaster, a painting of the Cascade Mountains that she had always thought was technically competent and emotionally empty. And she stood very still and let the full weight of it settle into her. Soo had been Min Seok's inside source, which meant Soo had access to everything, every operational discussion, every document movement, every security rotation, every schedule, Taejun's departure time, the staff situation on Friday mornings, the verification of the Han route. She thought of that specifically, the 31 hours, the precise matching of her findings, and understood now that Soo had not simply confirmed her analysis. Soo had already known what she would find. Because Soo had already known about Victor Han's secondary route. Because Soo was the reason it had been possible to remain hidden for 11 months. The knowledge reorganized itself inside her in seconds, the way information always reorganized itself when the correct frame emerged. Pieces that had seemed unrelated suddenly forming a pattern so obvious that it was briefly unbearable to have missed it. Sue had confirmed her findings because confirmed findings deflect suspicion. Because a woman who had been visibly right about one thing was a safer version of a threat than a woman whose findings were uncertain. Because Min Seok had not merely wanted her removed, he had wanted her credibility neutralized before she could be removed, so that whatever she found afterward, whatever she said to Tae-jun, would land as the paranoid claims of a woman who had already been wrong once. Except she hadn't been wrong. Sue had managed the verification to make it look like she was right about the route while concealing the depth of what the route actually meant. The footsteps below were reorganizing again. She heard the locked door being dealt with. Not forced, something more deliberate, which meant they had a secondary key source or a tool she hadn't accounted for. She had maybe 6 minutes before the upper floor was no longer hers. She sent a third text to Baksu as theirs. Do not communicate through him. Come to east window. Now. She moved back toward the east wing. She was halfway down the corridor when she heard the basement door open. She stopped. She counted the footsteps she had accounted for. 1 on the upper landing, contained but working free. 2 on the ground floor, reorganizing. 2 exterior. That was 5. She had planned for 5. The basement door had just opened. 6. Nia stood in the middle of the east wing corridor with the specific feeling of a person whose plan has just hit a wall. It did not know was there, and she ran the numbers in the 3 seconds she had before the footsteps reached the bottom of the basement staircase and found the ground floor. She had separated 1 from the primary team temporarily. She had 1 exterior asset en route. If Bak was coming, if Bak had gotten her messages, if Bak was not also compromised. She had a locked door buying her time on the upper landing that would not hold much longer. She had the west corridor, the east wing, the linen room window, and the particular geography of a house she knew better than anyone currently inside it. And she had a 6th person she had not planned for. She kept moving. The linen room was at the end of the corridor. She went inside and locked the door behind her and looked at the unlocked window and at the service courtyard below it, and at the distance from the sill to the ground. 11 feet. Hard surface. Her left arm was already aching from the corridor encounter. She had hit the door frame harder than she had meant to, and the joint had not enjoyed it. She looked at the window. She heard the footsteps on the stairs reach the 2nd floor. She heard the door at the end of the west corridor open. She heard the door at the top of the back staircase, the locked one, give way. 3 of them now, converging on the east wing from 2 directions. She went out the window. She took it fast, 1 leg over the sill, both hands on the frame, dropping and catching the exterior sill edge with her fingers for the deceleration, and she hit the courtyard with both feet and went to one knee immediately, absorbing it, and the impact rattled up through her knees and into her hips, and she stayed down for 1 second because her body asked for 1 second, and she gave it exactly that and no more. She stood up. Her left forearm had caught the edge of something on the way down. The mounting bracket of the exterior security light, she would realize later, which had a raw edge where a screw had been improperly installed. She looked at her arm. The sleeve of her cardigan was dark and wet from mid-forearm to the wrist. She registered the information, bleeding, significant, not immediately incapacitating. And she filed it in the category of things to address when she had options and kept moving toward the south side of the courtyard. She heard voices above her, the window, someone looking down. She pressed against the exterior wall of the house and went still. The voice said something in Korean. Another voice answered. Neither one sounded like they were coming down. The courtyard had 1 exit to the south garden and 1 back into the house through the service entrance. She needed the south garden because it gave her the lake approach, and the lake approach gave her the boathouse. And the boathouse had been the location of 1 specific thing she had noted in her 2nd week at the estate, a hardline telephone connection installed in the 1990s that was not on the estate's current telecommunications map, because the current telecommunications map had been drafted from the renovation records rather than the original construction documents. She had found this in a building permit filed in 1994. She had noted it in her leather notebook under the heading Infrastructure, unlisted. She had thought, when she noted it, probably not relevant. She moved through the south garden with her right hand pressed against her left forearm and her arm held against her body, because pressure mattered, and because losing the use of that arm in the next 30 minutes would significantly reduce her options, and she was already down to a number of options she did not feel comfortable looking at directly. She made it to the boathouse in 4 minutes. She went inside. She found the telephone panel in the northeast corner behind a wooden storage rack, and she moved the rack with her right shoulder. It was heavy. She was not at her best. It took 2 attempts. And she picked up the handset and listened for a dial tone that she had about a 40% chance of actually hearing, because a 30-year-old unlisted hardline at an estate that had changed hands twice might or might not have been maintained. The dial tone came through clear and steady. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she dialed the number for Tai-jun's cell phone from memory. She had memorized it in the first week of the arrangement because she memorized numbers the way other people memorized faces, automatically and without effort. And she waited. It rang 4 times. He picked up on the 5th. Yes. His voice was flat and guarded. An unknown number calling from an unknown line. Full operational caution. It's me, she said. Don't use Sue. Don't contact the estate through normal channels. There are at minimum 6 people in the house, and Sue coordinated the entry. A silence on the line that was not a long silence but contained a great deal. Are you hurt? He said. I'm functional, she said. I'm in the boathouse. Bach has 3 texts from me. If you trust Bach, call him directly. I need the interior cleared before I can go back in. How long can you hold the boathouse? She looked at the door. The dock? The lake beyond it, flat and gray under a sky that had gone overcast in the last hour. Long enough, she said. I'm coming back. I know, she said. Come fast. She set the handset down without hanging it up, because an open line provided information, and she turned to face the boathouse door, and she put her back against the telephone panel and slid down to the floor with her injured arm across her knee, applying pressure, and she sat in the smell of old wood and lake water, and looked at the rectangle of gray light that was the boathouse entrance, and listened to the estate above her and waited. Her arm hurt considerably. She had left her book on the desk. She thought about that for some reason. The open book, the reading glasses on the desk beside it, the half cup of coffee she had not finished. And she felt, rising through the controlled surface of her functional calm, something raw and less organized that she recognized as anger. Clean, clarifying, entirely appropriate anger. Not at being targeted. Not even at Sue, whose betrayal she was still in the process of absorbing. She was angry because she had been sitting in her library, in her chair, under her reading lamp, doing her work, and someone had decided that her existence was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be reckoned with. She had spent 32 years being that. She had spent 32 years watching people make that calculation about her and being patient about it, being strategic about it, turning it into a tool. She was tired of turning it into a tool. She pressed her arm against her knee and felt the pain in it as a kind of anchor, specific, real, the opposite of abstract. And she thought about Sue's face when he had left the good coffee by the door, and about the verified report sliding under her door at 6:40 in the morning, and about the way the information had felt so clean, so confirmed, and she thought about how long he had been doing this, how many other things he had managed, how many other conversations he had filtered and shaped and controlled from his position of trusted proximity. And she thought about what that meant for everything Tai-jun believed he knew about his own operation. The footsteps reached the south garden. She heard them stop at the boathouse door. The door was not locked. She had not locked it because locking it would have told them exactly where she was and given them a contained target, whereas an unlocked door with no visible light inside and the smell of old wood and standing water was a door that required clearing rather than breaching, which cost time and required a decision rather than a simple forced entry. She heard the decision being made outside. 2 voices, a brief exchange, weight shifting on the dock boards. She looked at the rectangle of gray light. She thought about the open book on her desk. She thought about Tai-jun's voice on the phone, the quality of the silence before he said, "Are you hurt?" What was in that silence, what she had heard in it that she had not expected to hear? Then the door opened, and the gray light came in, and the man in the doorway took 1 step inside and stopped when he registered that the room was not empty. And Nia was already moving from the floor before he finished processing what he was seeing, because she had been ready for precisely this moment since she sat down. And readiness, she had learned this in 32 years of watching people underestimate her, was the one advantage that nobody could take away if you were careful enough about hiding it. The man in the doorway had about 2 seconds of functional advantage over Nia Whitaker. He used neither of them well. He stepped inside and his eyes adjusted from the gray outdoor light to the darker interior of the boathouse. And in those 2 seconds, he was doing what eyes do, calibrating, finding edges, locating depth. And Nia was already off the floor with her weight forward and her right shoulder leading because her left arm was compromised, and she had already decided, in the 30 seconds before the door opened, exactly how this had to go given what she had available. She hit him at the sternum with her right shoulder, full momentum, using the floor-to-standing transition as the driver. Not a tackle, more like a controlled collision that she had directed at the precise center of his mass. And he went back against the door frame hard enough that the wood cracked somewhere, and the sound of it was loud in the small space, and he lost the gun. Not permanently. It skittered across the dock boards and stopped at the edge above the water. She was already past him. She went out the door and onto the dock, and she ran, which was not a graceful thing and did not feel controlled. It felt like a body doing what a body does when it has no remaining options, burning everything available, pain filing itself away under something larger and more immediate. And she went for the path along the lake edge that curved north toward the estate's secondary entrance rather than back toward the main house, because the main house was compromised and the secondary entrance led out onto the service road, and the service road was where Bach would come from if Bach was coming. Behind her, she heard the man on the dock recover, heard him yell something in Korean, an alert, directional, telling the others where she had gone. She did not have to understand the language to understand the meaning. The path along the lake was uneven. She had walked it dozens of times in the 7 weeks she had been at the estate. Morning walks, evening walks, the particular circuit she did when she needed to think through a problem without sitting still. She knew where the roots were. She knew where the ground dropped suddenly toward the water on the east curve. She knew where the maintenance crew had laid a section of gravel that was loose enough to turn an ankle if you weren't expecting it. She knew these things. The people behind her did not. She heard one of them hit the gravel section at speed. She heard him go down. She did not look back. Her left arm was sending signals she was choosing to ignore. The sleeve of her cardigan was soaked through, and the pressure she had been maintaining was gone now. Lost the moment she had gone from sitting to running, and the arm was reminding her of this with a specific, insistent quality of pain that was different from the general physical duress of the last 40 minutes. More focused, more demanding, the kind of pain that carried information. She processed the information. She kept running. The secondary entrance came into view, the wooden gate in the estate's north fence line, the one that led onto the service road through a stand of Douglas firs that the estate's previous owner had planted for privacy, and which now served the more practical function of blocking sightlines from the road. The gate was closed. She hit it at full stride, got her right hand on the latch, and had it open in 2 seconds, and she was through and onto the service road, and she stopped. The road was empty. She stood in the cold morning air with her arm against her body and her breath coming in ragged pulls, and she looked both directions down the service road, empty in both directions. The Douglas firs on either side cut the wind and held the silence, and the road ran straight for about 300 yards north before it curved toward the main access road. She had maybe 90 seconds before the men on the lake path reached the secondary gate. She pulled out the secondary phone. Her right hand was shaking slightly. Adrenaline, she noted, the metabolic cost of the last hour presenting itself, and she unlocked the screen and looked at the messages. One new message from a number she did not have saved. South side of Service Road. Silver. Come now. She looked south. 200 yards down, pulled into the tree line on the south shoulder of the service road, was a silver sedan she did not recognize. The driver's door opened as she looked at it. She ran toward it. Bach was younger than she had registered in the 2-car ride she had taken with him, mid-30s, with a square jaw and a deliberate quality about his movements that spoke to training she had never asked about. He looked at her arm when she got in, and his expression did something that he controlled in under a second. He pulled onto the service road without speaking. "How many texts did you get from me?" she said. 3. "And from Taejun?" "Called me directly 4 minutes ago. He's in the air." Bach checked his mirror. "He said to get you out and hold position. He said don't go back to the estate." "I'm not going back to the estate," she said. "I need somewhere I can sit down and think for 30 minutes without someone trying to kill me." Bach was quiet for a moment. "I know a place," he said. They drove north. In the side mirror, Nia watched the secondary entrance of the estate recede. She did not see anyone emerge through the gate. She kept watching until the curve of the road took it out of sight. She turned forward. She looked at her arm. She looked at the road. "Did you know about Sue?" she asked. Bak's jaw moved. "No," he said. "I knew something was wrong inside the structure for about 6 months. I didn't know where it was." "Min Seok?" "I suspected. I didn't have anything solid." "You didn't tell Tai Jun?" Bak was quiet for a moment. "I told his father things once, a long time ago, before I had solid proof. The outcome was—" He stopped. "I learned to wait until I had something concrete." Nia processed that, filed it. "Sue managed the verification of my findings on the Han route," she said. "He confirmed what I found because it was real, and because confirming it made me appear useful while containing the depth of what I was actually seeing. He's been running information management for Min Seok for at least as long as he's been coordinating logistics." Bak made a sound that wasn't quite a word. 11 years, he said. "Yes." The silver sedan moved through the fur-lined service roads north of the estate, and neither of them said anything else, and Nia sat with her arm and the information and the particular quality of clarity that extreme circumstances produce. The cleaning out of everything unnecessary, the reduction of the world to its actual components. The place Bak knew was a diner 6 miles north of the estate, the kind of place that had been serving the same breakfast menu since 1987 and smelled of coffee and bacon grease and the particular warmth of a space that had been occupied continuously for decades. It was 10:15 in the morning on a Friday, and there were 4 other customers, none of them paying attention to anything beyond their plates. Bak spoke quietly to the woman at the counter, who looked at Nia's arm and disappeared into the back and returned with a first aid kit and a clean dish towel without being asked. Nia sat in the corner booth with her back to the wall. She rolled up her sleeve. The cut on her forearm was longer than she had hoped and deeper than she had told Tai Jun. The bracket edge had caught her at an angle, and the wound had an irregular character that she looked at with clinical attention for about 4 seconds before she accepted that she was not going to be able to handle this with a diner's first aid kit. She applied pressure with the dish towel. She held it. She thought. Sue had 11 years of access. 11 years of knowing which documents moved through which channels, which operations were run by which people, which security rotations were adjusted, and when. He had been the organizational nervous system, the person through whom information moved in both directions, because that was what logistics coordinators were. They saw everything. They touched everything. They were so essential that their access was never questioned. And in all of that time, in all of those 11 years, Tai Jun had trusted him. She thought about what that meant, not abstractly, concretely, operationally. Every internal assessment Tai Jun had been made with Sue's information as part of the foundation. Every decision about personnel, about security, about risk. Sue had been filtering the inputs, which meant the threat was not only Min Seok. Min Seok was the actor. Sue was the infrastructure that made acting possible. And if Sue had been working with Min Seok, then the question was not only what Min Seok had done with that access, the question was what else had been shaped by it. What other information had been managed? What other outcomes had been quietly steered? The Victor Han situation, for instance. She thought about the Han route. She thought about the specific documents she had found, the property transfers, the permits, the warehousing agreement. She had found them through a civilian access path, through public municipal records that Sue had no visibility into. But the internal response to her findings, the verification, the strategy adjustment, the organizational response, all of that had moved through channels Sue controlled. She opened the secondary phone with her right hand. She started a list. Not in her notebook. That was back in the library, on the desk, beside the open book. In the notes application on the phone, which was less satisfying but functionally identical, she wrote what Sue had access to, what Min Seok knew as a result, what decisions were shaped by filtered information. She wrote 3 names of operations she had overheard in the past 7 weeks that she had not fully analyzed because they were not her business. She wrote dates beside them. She drew lines between the dates and the organizational decisions that had followed. Her arm ached steadily under the dish towel. Bak sat across from her with coffee and said nothing. At 11:40, her secondary phone rang. Taejun's number. "Where are you?" he said. She told him. "Back's location is clean," Taejun said. "I've already cross-referenced." A pause. "How bad is the arm?" "It needs a physician." "I have someone. They'll meet you at the north property in 1 hour." Another pause, this one carrying more weight. "I've grounded Sue. He doesn't know yet." "Don't let him know you've grounded him," she said. "Let him think he's still operational for the next 2 hours. If he thinks he's been identified, he'll move to contingency communications and you'll lose the thread." Silence. "You've been thinking about this for the last hour," Taejun said. "I've been thinking about this since I saw him at the gate." "The north property in 1 hour," he said. "We'll talk when you're there." The line closed. Nia set the phone down. She looked at the dish towel. She thought about the estate, the library, the reading lamp, the unfinished coffee, the open book. She thought about the second bookshelf Taejun had ordered, which had arrived on Thursday and which she had spent an hour organizing the previous afternoon, while music played on a small speaker she had brought from her old apartment. She thought about all of the small, specific things that had accumulated in 7 weeks into something that felt, surprisingly and inconveniently, like a life she did not want interrupted. She picked up the phone and added 3 more items to her list. The north property was a smaller structure on the other side of the estate, technically a guest cottage set back from the main lakefront on 2 acres of fir trees, connected to the main estate by a private road that did not appear on any public map. Nia had known it existed from the property records. She had never been there. Taejun arrived 20 minutes after she did. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a private physician named Dr. Lim, finishing the last of 6 stitches in her forearm when the door opened. Taejun came in with 3 men she recognized as his outermost security circle, the ones who existed on the organizational periphery, deliberately disconnected from the main structure, which she now understood had been a more prophylactic decision than she had previously appreciated. He looked at her arm. He looked at her face. He looked at the phone on the table with her list open on the screen. He sat down across from her and Dr. Lim finished the last stitch and taped the dressing and stood and excused himself. And then it was just Nia and Taejun and the 3 security men in the doorway and the sound of the firs outside moving in a wind that had come up off the lake. "Tell me what you saw," Taejun said. She told him. All of it in sequence, with the specific details in order. The footsteps, the timing, the acoustic management, the window, the boathouse, the phone call on the hard line, the man at the door, the lake path, the gate. And then Sue, at the estate gate, standing beside the vehicle with his phone. The particular posture she had recognized at 200 yards because she had been watching people closely for 32 years. Taejun listened without moving. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table. She could see the tendons in them. 11 years, he said. "Yes." "He was with my father." "I know." He stood up and walked to the window and stood there with his back to the room, and she let him have a moment because she understood what 11 years of misplaced trust felt like, or close enough to imagine it from the outside, which was as far as her experience allowed. Then he turned back. "The list on your phone," he said. "What is it?" "Operations that may have been shaped by filtered information over the past 12 to 18 months, she said. "It's not complete. I need the full operational calendar for that period and the corresponding logistics records, the real ones, not the ones that pass through Sue's coordination layer. I can give you what I know internally once I have those." Taejun looked at the phone. "The Han situation," he said. "Yes." "Sue confirmed your findings." "Sue confirmed what was confirmable," she said. "But I think he also used the confirmation to give Min Seok 48 hours to adjust the secondary route before your response strategy was deployed." The room went very still. The man nearest the door, a senior security presence whose name she did not know, compact and gray-haired and watchful, shifted his weight in a way that was barely visible and completely communicative. "The response strategy failed," Taejun said. "Not a question." "The northern interdiction succeeded," she said, "but Han didn't lose anything on the eastern route, which had been, up to that point, his primary operational line for 11 months. A successful interdiction on a secondary route that he had already planned to abandon." Taejun sat back down. He put both hands flat on the table again. He looked at them. We celebrated, he said, in a tone that was not quite expressionless.
3 weeks ago, the whole team, Sue organized it. Nia said nothing. There was nothing useful to say about that.
All right, Tae-jun said. He straightened. The quality of his stillness shifted, the grieving version giving way to something colder and more operational. What do I need to do in the next 2 hours to keep Sue from knowing he's been identified? She picked up the phone. He needs to receive a communication that looks like standard damage control, she said. Something that implies the operation at the estate failed because of an external alert, rather than because he was identified. It needs to come through the normal channel, which means it needs to look like it came from Min Seok's assessment, not from you. Min Seok needs to believe he has a window of ambiguity. Why do I want Min Seok to believe that? Because the moment Min Seok knows it's over, Sue goes into contingency and you lose the communications thread, and the 3 names I have written on this list as suspected secondary participants either go quiet or leave the country. She looked at him. You need to convene the senior structure tomorrow, full attendance, including Min Seok. Let him come in thinking he's managing a failed operation. Let him sit down at that table believing the situation is still recoverable. And then everything in the room changes at once, she said, and there's nowhere to go. Tae-jun was looking at her with an expression she could not entirely read. It was not one of his controlled expressions. It was something that had gotten through the control, something with more weight in it than professional assessment. You worked all of this out while a man was trying to kill you, he said. I worked some of it out beforehand, she said. The rest came while I was sitting in the boathouse. With a cut arm. The arm didn't affect my thinking. He looked at her for a moment longer, then he pulled out his own phone and started making calls. The next 18 hours had a particular quality that Nia would later associate with the specific texture of irreversibility. The feeling of a door closing behind you so completely that the room you were in before becomes theoretical. She slept 3 hours on the cottage's spare bed, with her arm elevated, and woke at 5 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table with borrowed clothes and the secondary phone and the list she had been building since the diner, expanding it now with the additional information that Tae-jun's inner security circle had assembled overnight. It was considerable. Sue had been running a secondary communication channel for Min Seok for at least 14 months. The channel used a nested corporate email structure that had looked, on the surface, like routine logistics correspondence, invoices, shipping confirmations, vendor contacts, and had been, in practice, a steady stream of operational intelligence, personnel movements, security rotations, meeting schedules, financial positions. The full nervous system of the Kang organization, compressed into the language of business correspondence and passed through a structure that had never been audited because nobody had thought to audit it. The Han route intelligence had been part of it, but not the most significant part. The most significant part was a series of communications from 8 months ago in which Sue had passed Min Seok the financial architecture of 3 of the organization's core legitimate holdings, the property portfolio, the shipping interests, the contracted municipal service operations, in enough detail that a third party could, if sufficiently motivated, construct a legal case against the organization that would not require inside testimony to prosecute. Nia stared at that section of the report for a long time. Then she went and knocked on the door of the room where Tae-jun had been working through the night. He opened it. He looked like a man who had not slept, which he had not, and who had spent several hours confronting the specific kind of betrayal that reorganizes everything you thought you knew about your own history. There was a quality to his face that was not anger. Anger was too simple, but something that anger was part of, along with a bleak, disciplined quality of recognition. She showed him the section on the financial architecture. He read it standing in the doorway with the phone in both hands. When he finished, he handed it back. Min Seok wasn't planning to take the organization, he said. He was planning to destroy it. If removing you failed, she said. Yes. The financial documentation is a contingency. If the operation this morning had succeeded, Min Seok inherits. If it failed and you came after him, he had the option of surfacing the financial documentation to external investigators and burning everything down rather than losing it. Taking me with it. Taking everything with it. Tae-jun set his hand on the doorframe. He looked at the wall. My father trusted him, he said. Your father's trust is what gave him the time to build this, she said. Not unkindly, just with the directness that situations past a certain point require. He nodded. Once. A small, contained movement. The meeting is at 10, he said. Is there anything else you need from me before then? The operational calendar, she said, and the real logistics records, not the Sue-managed version. I need to finish the list before everyone sits down. He gave her what she needed. She went back to the kitchen table. She worked until 8:30 when she put on the coat that Bach had retrieved from his car because it happened to fit her approximately and her cardigan was evidence, and she drank 2 cups of coffee and 8 toast and looked at the finished list. 17 items. 3 confirmed secondary participants. 14 months of managed intelligence. 1 contingency that could, if activated, expose 4 separate financial entities to regulatory investigation severe enough to require years of legal remediation. She folded the list, put it in the coat pocket. She thought about Min Seok sitting at that table in a few hours, believing he was walking into damage assessment, believing he had enough ambiguity still to work with, believing that the soft civilian wife's survival was an operational setback rather than the specific mechanism of his exposure. She thought about the look on his face in the library when she had said, "Powerful men leave paper trails because they assume nobody intelligent is reading them." She had been talking about Victor Han. She had, as it turned out, also been talking about Park Min-seok, and about Sue, and about every person in 19 years who had built a structure around assumed invisibility, who had filed things in places they believed no one would look, who had moved through the world on the working assumption that the quiet woman in the corner with the reading glasses was not a threat worth accounting for. She finished her coffee. She put on Bach's coat. She walked out of the cottage into the cold morning air and stood for a moment looking at the firs, which were moving in a lighter wind than yesterday, the lake visible in pieces through the tree line, gray-green and flat. Her arm ached under the dressing. Her knees ached from the drop off the window. She was tired in a way that went past physical into something more fundamental. The tiredness of a person who has been required, in a short span of time, to become a version of themselves they had not previously needed to be. She was not sure yet how she felt about that version. She was sure it had worked. Bach pulled the car around at 9:15. Tae-jun came out of the cottage with his 3 security men and looked at her standing by the car. "You don't have to be in the room," he said. "I know," she said. She got in the car. He got in beside her, which was not something that had happened before. Usually he rode separately, a habit of operational separation that she had understood as professional caution. They drove in silence for a while. The service road through the firs, the private road back toward the main estate, which had been cleared and secured overnight by the outer circle team. The lake appearing on their left as the trees thinned, the same lake she had looked at from the window of the linen room while she was listening for footsteps. "In the boathouse," Tae-jun said. "On the phone. You said come fast." "Yes," she said. "Not please come," or "I need help," or "come fast" was the relevant information, she said. Everything else was implicit. He was quiet for a moment. "You're different from what I expected," he said, "even accounting for having read the thesis, even accounting for having spent 7 weeks in the same house." She looked at the lake. "What did you expect?" she said. "I don't know," he said. "Someone more—" He stopped. "Manageable," she said. He did not deny it. "For what it's worth," she said, "you're different from what I expected too." He did not ask her what she had expected. She thought that was the correct decision. Some things benefited from being left in the space where they were said and not pressed into the shape of an answer. The car reached the main estate. The security team had cleared the grounds. The estate looked the same as it always did from the exterior. The glass and angles, the lake behind it, the quiet that belonged to the property itself, rather than to anything that had happened inside it. She looked at it as they pulled in. "The library door," she said. "I left my book open." Bach glanced at her in the mirror. "I can—" he started. "It's fine," she said. "I remember the page." They went inside. The conference room was set for a full senior structure meeting. The long table, the chairs, the particular arrangement that established hierarchy through seating position, and that she had read within 3 minutes of attending her first meeting. 12 chairs. 11 occupants expected. The 12th chair, the one beside Tae-jun, had not been occupied before. It was occupied today. Nia sat down. She put the folded list on the table in front of her. She put her hands flat on the table beside it. At 10 o'clock exactly, the doors opened and the men filed in, and Park Min-seok came in with them. Last, which was his habitual position, the position of a man who preferred to observe an entire room's arrangement before he committed himself to it. He was wearing the same controlled expression he always wore. He sat at Tae-jun's left. He did not look at Nia for the first 30 seconds. When he finally did look at her, she was already looking at him. She did not look away. He looked at the folded paper in front of her. He looked at her face, and something moved through his expression. Not panic. Min-seok was too experienced for panic, but the specific, unmistakable shift of a man who has just registered for the first time that the room he has walked into is not the room he was expecting, and that the woman across the table, who he had sent men to remove from a house she loved on a Friday morning, is not sitting in that chair because someone brought her there. She is sitting in that chair because she decided to. Tae-jun set both hands flat on the table. "Let's begin," he said. And the silence that followed, 12 people in a room where the weight of what was about to happen pressed down on every surface, was the loudest silence Nia had ever sat inside, and she sat inside it without moving, without looking away from Min-seok's face, and she waited for Tae-jun to open the door that she had already, in the boathouse and the diner and the cottage kitchen, built the key for. Tae-jun did not raise his voice. That was the first thing Min-seok had not prepared for. He had prepared for anger, the hot, forward-leaning anger of a young boss who had just survived an attempt on his household and needed to demonstrate authority through force of reaction. He had prepared for accusation without evidence, which he could contest. He had prepared for the possibility of violence, which he could absorb or redirect depending on the room's energy. He had spent 19 years in rooms like this one, under a man far more temperamentally volatile than his son, and he knew how to manage the emotional weather of a confrontation. He had not prepared for Tae-jun setting both hands flat on the table and beginning to speak in the measured, deliberate tone of a man who had already decided every outcome before he sat down. "I want to tell everyone in this room," Tae-jun said, "what happened yesterday morning. Not the version that was communicated through standard channels. The actual version. Because I think it's important that every person sitting at this table understands, with complete clarity, what the situation is." Min-seok's face did not change. His hands, flat on the table, did not move. But Nia, who was watching him with the same quality of attention she brought to documents, looking for the structural inconsistencies, the small places where the presentation did not match the underlying data, saw the single adjustment in his jaw. A tightening, brief and controlled, gone in under a second. He had not been expecting this opening. Good. Tae-jun walked through it without theater. The morning, the reduced staff schedule, his departure to San Francisco, the intruders, their number, their coordination, their access to the floor plan, and the security rotation that should have been internal information. He named each thing specifically and let it sit without embellishment, the way a man reads a ledger, item by item, weight by weight. Then he said, Sue coordinated the entry. The room moved. Not dramatically. These were not men who expressed themselves dramatically, but in the particular way of men for whom unexpected information has a physical quality, a shift, a collective recalibration. Two men across the table from Nia exchanged a glance that lasted less than a second and communicated a complete conversation. Min-seok said nothing. His hands remained flat on the table. Sue has been running a secondary communications channel for 14 months, Tae-jun continued. The channel was constructed inside the logistics correspondence infrastructure. Every operational detail that passed through Sue's coordination, personnel movements, security rotations, financial positions, meeting schedules, was available to the party on the other end of that channel. He paused. He looked at Min-seok. Min-seok looked back at him. "I want to give you the opportunity," Tae-jun said, "to say anything you want to say before I continue." The silence stretched for 6 seconds. Nia counted them. She watched Min-seok's face move through 3 distinct internal calculations in that time. The assessment of the room, the assessment of the evidence implied, the assessment of available exits from a situation that had fewer exits than he had believed when he sat down, and then settle into something that was almost, but not quite, composure. You're making an accusation, Min Seok said. I'm describing a situation, Tae-jun said. The accusation is implicit, but I'm giving you the room first. Min Seok's eyes moved to Nia for a fraction of a second, then back to Tae-jun. She told you this, he said. She identified Sue at the estate gate during the operation, Tae-jun said. The documentation supporting the 14-month channel came from my security team's overnight work. Would you like to see the specifics? Min Seok said nothing. Nia unfolded the list. She set it on the table in front of her. Not pushed toward him, not displayed theatrically, just placed there on the table. Available. 17 items, she said. Her voice was level and quiet. Not cold, just precise, the way she was when she presented findings. 3 confirmed secondary participants within the current senior structure. 14 months of managed intelligence across logistics, security rotation, and financial architecture. The en route verification, which Sue confirmed selectively, omitting the window he gave you to adjust the eastern route before the response strategy was deployed. She paused. The interdiction 3 weeks ago succeeded on the route Han had already planned to abandon. The room was very still. The man to Tae-jun's right, a senior coordinator named Wu, who had been with the organization for 8 years, and who Nia had assessed from the beginning as fundamentally honest in the way of a man who had chosen his loyalties early and maintained them out of something more durable than convenience, had gone slightly pale. Not from shock at Min Seok's guilt, from the specific horror of someone realizing how thoroughly they had been deceived inside a structure they thought they understood. Min Seok looked at the list. He looked at Nia. And then, for the first time in all the weeks she had been watching him, in the conference room, in the library doorway, in the secondary meeting she had learned about through Cho's folded note, he stopped managing his expression entirely, and what came through underneath was not rage and not fear, but something that was almost in its raw form, grief. The grief of a man who had wanted a different outcome and had been willing to do monstrous things to achieve it, and had still lost. She doesn't belong here, he said. Not loudly, not with force. The words came out of something older than the meeting, older than the past 7 weeks. This world, what we are, what we do. She doesn't understand it. She doesn't have the right to... She survived 6 armed men in my house, Tae-jun said. The quietness of it was more final than a shout. With a cut arm, alone, using a 30-year-old unlisted telephone line she found in a building permit filed in 1994. He looked at Min Seok steadily. Tell me again what she doesn't understand. Min Seok closed his mouth. The grief moved through his face and then behind it again, and the control came back, but it was a different kind of control now. Not the control of a man managing a situation, but the control of a man who has accepted a situation's conclusion and is deciding only how to inhabit it. The contingency, he said. Not a question, a recognition. He was looking at Nia. The financial architecture documentation, she said. Yes. We have the communications where you sent it to Sue's external contact. The documentation itself is still in the external holding structure. We've identified the location. You don't have access to activate it, and the external contact has been unreachable since 6 this morning. Min Seok absorbed that. You moved fast, he said. I had the list ready before I came into this room, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his eyes that she could not fully categorize. It was not admiration exactly, and it was not hatred, and it occupied a territory between those two things that did not have a simple name. Your father, he said, turning back to Tae-jun. His voice had dropped to something rougher and less managed. He would not have married someone like her. He understood the boundary between the world and... My father, Tae-jun said, made decisions I am not required to replicate, including the decision to trust you without an audit for 19 years. He paused. I'm not angry at my father for that. He made the decision he had information to support. I'm making the decision I have information to support. Min Seok looked at his hands. For a moment, just a moment, Nia almost felt something for him. Not sympathy, not forgiveness, but the particular weight of looking at a person who had built their entire self around a version of the world that no longer existed and had committed unforgivable acts trying to preserve it. It was not a comfortable feeling, and she did not hold on to it. The 3 secondary participants, Tae-jun said, I want their names confirmed before this meeting closes. Min Seok looked up. He looked around the table, at the men who had been his colleagues for most of his adult life, at the faces that were not looking back at him with the deference he had spent 2 decades cultivating. He named them, all 3. Without hesitation, which told Nia something about the particular mathematics of the moment. He had calculated that protecting them cost more than it was worth, that the information was already known or knowable, that the only remaining negotiation was the terms of his own exit from an organization he had failed to take. Tae-jun nodded at Wu. Wu stood and left the room. 3 minutes later, the doors opened at the far end of the room, and the 3 named men were brought in, and the specific quality of their faces. The one who looked immediately at Min Seok with something between accusation and pleading, the one who went blank with the blankness of a man shutting down internal systems, the one who looked at the floor and kept looking there, confirmed everything. Nia did not watch them. She watched Min Seok watch them, and she saw, in that specific unguarded moment, the thing she had not seen before in all her weeks of observation, the cost of what he had done, landing on him all at once, in the faces of the men he had recruited and used, and was now watching face the consequences of a plan that had not been honest with them about its actual stakes. That was the moment. Not the confrontation, not the evidence, not the naming of names. That was the moment that closed it. Min Seok was removed from the organization that afternoon. The specifics of that removal were handled by Tae-jun's inner circle in the east wing of the estate, in rooms Nia did not enter, and conversations she was not part of, because there were limits to what she needed to witness, and she had been precise about where those limits were. She understood the world she had married into. She did not require herself to become it. She went to the library. The book was still on the desk, open to the page she had left it on, her reading glasses beside it, the cold cup of coffee from Friday morning, which someone had removed at some point during the security team's work in the house. She picked up the book. She found her page. She sat in the reading chair and looked at the words for a while without reading them, which was not something she did often. Her arm ached under the dressing. The afternoon light came through the west windows at the angle she had positioned the chair to catch, the specific angle she had noticed in the first week and adjusted for, and which was, she had decided, one of the genuinely good things about this particular room. She heard Tae-jun's footsteps in the corridor at 4:15, the 2 knocks. "Come in," she said. He entered and sat in his chair. It was definitively his chair at this point, the writing desk chair pulled around to face her reading chair, the specific arrangement that their late-night conversations had established as the default configuration for this room. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who had not slept, though that was also true. The tired of a man who has done a necessary thing that costs more than the necessity justified. He sat with his hands in his lap, not on the table, which was different. "The 3 secondary participants," she said. "Handled." He paused. "Not violently. Removed from operational positions. 2 of them had families. I'm not—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter." "It does matter," she said. "That it matters to you." He looked at the window. "Sue," he said. "Yes?" "He wants to speak with you." Nia looked at him. He specifically asked, Tae-jun said. "Not with me. With you." He said. Tae-jun paused, and the pause carried the weight of something he had not expected to be told. He said you were the only person in the organization who ever looked at his work and understood what it actually was. The room was quiet for a moment. "He's not wrong," she said. "I know." "That's not absolution," she said. "I know that too." She looked at the book in her lap, at the open page, at the paragraph she had been on when she heard the footsteps in the kitchen corridor on Friday morning, which felt like a different unit of time than the current moment, not days ago, but dimensionally separate, belonging to a version of her life that had a different shape from this one. "I'll speak with him," she said. Tae-jun nodded. He did not ask why. That was the correct response, and she noted it. Sue was in the small room off the security station, the same room where Min Seok had held the secondary meeting she had learned about through Cho's note. The symmetry of the location was either intentional or accidental, and she decided it didn't matter which. He was sitting at the table with his hands clasped in front of him. He had the look of a man who has moved past the operational phase of a crisis and arrived at the accounting phase, where there is nothing to manage and nothing to calculate, and only the weight of what has been done remaining. She sat across from him. She did not bring anything with her, Not the notebook, not the phone. She sat with her hands in her lap and her arm aching, and she looked at him. He was quiet for a moment. I watched you work, he said. From the beginning. The verification of the Han route. I confirmed what you found because you were right. You would have been right regardless. I couldn't fabricate a counter-finding that would hold against actual scrutiny, and I knew you were the kind of person who would apply actual scrutiny. He paused. So I confirmed it and used the timing. I know, she said. I want you to know that the confirmation was real, he said. You were right. I didn't make you right. You found it the way you found it, independently, without access to anything I controlled. She looked at him. Why does that matter to you? She said. He was quiet for a long moment. Because in 11 years, he said, I built something that required me to be the smartest person in the room, the most necessary, the one without whom the system could not function. His hands tightened slightly against each other. And then you walked into this house, and in 3 days you found something I had spent 11 months concealing, using nothing but public records and the way your mind works. He looked at her. I needed you to know that I understood what you were, even when I was working against you. Nia sat with that. You could have told Taejun, she said, about Min Seok. Yes. Min Seok came to me 4 years ago, Sue said. When the old man was still alive and Taejun was still, he was different then, less certain. Min Seok made an argument that was not unreasonable given what we knew at the time. He paused. I made a choice, and then I was inside the choice, and there is a point in those situations where the exit costs more than you can pay. I know about that kind of situation, she said. He looked at her. Not with surprise, but with something more careful than surprise. I know you do, he said. That's why I asked to speak with you. She sat for a moment longer. The external contact, she said, the financial architecture documentation. Is there anything in that structure that your team missed? He looked at his hands. No, he said. I built it to be complete, and I gave your team the complete location. There's nothing remaining in an external position. She believed him, not because she was naive, because she had been reading people for 32 years, and she understood the specific quality of a man telling the truth from inside the place where the truth no longer costs him anything to tell. All right, she said. She stood up. She looked at him one more time, at the face of a man who had been, in parallel, the person who left good coffee by her door and the person who had given men a floor plan of the house she lived in. And she felt the specific difficulty of people, the way they were never one thing, the way the damage they did and the kindness they showed were not separate streams but the same complicated water. I'm sorry, he said, for what it's worth. It's worth something, she said. Not enough, but something. She left. The weeks that followed had a different texture from the weeks before. Not quieter, exactly. Not easier, but different in the way that things are different after a storm. Not because the landscape has become safe, but because the specific shape of its danger is now known, and known danger has a different quality from unknown danger. You can work with known. Victor Han's eastern route was shut down completely within 2 weeks using the intelligence that Nia had compiled from the original documents and expanded in the cottage kitchen in the hours before the confrontation. The operation did not go smoothly. There were complications that Taejun handled without her detailed involvement, and that she understood in outline from the conversations that happened in the conference room while she was in the library. But it concluded. The territory that had been incrementally absorbed over 11 months was incrementally recovered over 6 weeks through a combination of legal pressure on the corporate structures and operational displacement that she did not need the specifics of to follow. Han himself retreated, not permanently and not without signaling his intention to test the boundary again at some future point. But the immediate expansion stopped, and the secondary route that had been his primary operational line for nearly a year was dismantled to the point of reconstruction being more expensive than worth. Taejun's organization stabilized. Not completely, not without cost. 3 positions in the senior structure remained unfilled for months because the pool of people who were both qualified and demonstrably unconnected to Min Seok's network was smaller than the structure required. Wu was elevated to a role that was more responsibility than he had wanted, and she watched him absorb the weight of it, in the way that solid, unglamorous men absorb things, by widening their stance and continuing to move. Cho brought her documents less obliquely. He started leaving them on her desk directly, with his name on the top, which was its own kind of progress. Chaewon began showing up at the library doorway with specific questions rather than adjacent ones, the way he had before when he was still deciding whether she was worth consulting. The questions were good. She answered them honestly and sometimes told him he was asking the wrong question and redirected him to the right one. And he took the redirection without resentment, which was a quality she respected. The organization learned to work with her, not around her, not in deference to her. With her the way you work with a tool that has proven its function and earned its place on the bench. She did not become something she was not. She kept her job at the city archives. She drove in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and sat at her actual desk with her actual colleagues and did actual archival work, the municipal records and the filing patterns, and the ongoing documentation of a city that never stopped generating evidence of itself. Her supervisor had noticed, over the past months, that she seemed somewhat more distracted than her usual self, and had asked once if everything was all right. She said yes. She was not entirely wrong. On a Tuesday evening in late March, she came home from the archives to find the estate quieter than usual. The staff had reduced to evening configuration. The security team was present, but not visible. The lake was catching the last of the late winter light in the way it did at this specific hour on clear days, turning the water the color of something between gray and green that she had never found an adequate word for. She went to the library. She put her bag on the desk. She took off her coat. She was reaching for the reading lamp when she heard footsteps in the corridor, Taijun's, which she still tracked by habit, though the tracking had lost the analytical quality it had started with and become something more like awareness, the way you are aware of weather, or the position of furniture in a room you know well. He knocked. "Come in," she said. He came in and stood in the center of the room, not moving toward the desk chair, which was different. He had a quality about him of a man who has decided to say something and is working through the precise words, which she recognized because it was how he operated at his best, not speaking until the language was exact. She waited. "This stopped being an arrangement a long time ago," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I want to be honest about that. I was not raised to be good at this, and the years since haven't improved the situation. I know how to manage things. I know how to hold things together under pressure. I know how to—" He stopped. "I don't know how to say what I mean without sounding like I'm conducting a negotiation." "You're not conducting a negotiation," she said. "No." "Then say it the way it actually is," she said, without the framework. He looked at her. He put his hands in his pockets, which was a posture she had seen exactly once before. The night at the cottage kitchen when Dr. Lim had finished the stitches, and the room had cleared and it had been just the two of them, and the fact of everything that had happened. "Since you came into this house," he said, "I have felt less alone than at any point I can remember." He paused. "Not because of what you know, not because of what you can do, because of what you are when you think no one is watching, which is the same thing you are when everyone is watching, and that is the rarest quality I have encountered in 38 years of living among people who are almost always performing something." Nia set down the reading lamp she had been about to turn on. She looked at him for a long moment. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited. "I have never wanted to be small," she said. "I have spent my entire life in rooms where being small was the expectation, where the size of my body and the quietness of my manner and the particular kind of work I do all added up, in other people's calculations, to someone who was easy to overlook. I am finished being patient about that. I was patient because it was strategic and because I didn't yet have a context where I didn't have to be." She paused. I will not become small here. I will not become your trophy or your decorative liability or the soft civilian wife that gets managed and protected and kept away from the real work. I will keep my job. I will keep my books. I will tell you when I think you're wrong, and I am wrong sometimes too, and I will not pretend otherwise. He did not move. I will not pretend that what I feel is simple, she continued, because it isn't, and I don't trust simple feelings in complicated situations. But I'm not leaving this house because it got difficult, and I'm not pretending the arrangement is what it was when we sat down in that restaurant in February because it isn't. She stopped. He looked at her. Is that it? He said. No, she said. I also want better coffee, not the standard blend every day. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Almost. Done, he said. And I want you to stop hesitating at the library door, she said. You've been knocking for 4 months. You don't have to knock anymore. He was quiet for a moment. Old habit, he said. I know, she said. Keep the habit, but stop hesitating before it. He came fully into the room then. He sat in his chair. He looked at the shelves, both of them, the original and the one he had ordered, both full now, her books spilling across them in the organized system that made perfect sense to her and probably appeared chaotic to everyone else. He looked at the lake through the west windows, the last of the light gone now, the water a dark mirror. She turned on the lamp. She sat down. Neither of them spoke for a while, which was not uncomfortable. It was the specific comfort of a silence that does not require filling, that exists between two people who have been through something together and have come out the other side and are sitting in the fact of that without needing to make it into language. What are you reading? He said. She showed him the cover. He looked at it. He tilted his head slightly. Is it good? It's very good, she said. You can borrow it when I'm done. I have my own books, he said. I know, she said, but mine are better. He looked at her. She looked at him. And then she opened the book, and he reached over and picked up the document he had apparently brought in with him and set on the edge of the desk. A report of some kind, something operational. And they sat in the library with the lamp on, and the lake dark outside the windows, and read in the particular companionable quiet of two people who have, without planning to, built something real inside what began as something practical. They drove up to the Cascades 6 weeks later. Taejun had mentioned the cabin once, in passing, in one of the late-night conversations. Said he owned a property up there, said he hadn't been in years, said the road to it was difficult in winter, but the spring would have cleared it by now. He had said it in the way people mention things they have complicated feelings about. Nia had not pressed. She pressed, eventually. Not with insistence, just with the particular quality of attention that made it clear she had noted the mention and found it meaningful and was prepared to wait as long as necessary for the moment when he was ready to explain it. 2 weeks after she pressed, he told her about the cabin, that his father had built it in the 1990s as a retreat and had used it frequently in the early years and then almost never, as the organization grew and the demands on his time became total, and that Taejun had inherited it along with everything else and had gone there twice since his father's death alone, and both times had found the silence of it more difficult than the noise of Seattle. Why? She said. He was quiet for a moment. Peaceful places remind me of everything I could lose, he said. She thought about that. Come back to it, she said, with me. See if it's different. It took him another month to agree. The drive up was long and wound through terrain that changed in stages, the city giving way to suburb giving way to the long gradual climb into the Cascades, the Douglas firs thickening on either side of the road until they shut out the flatland world entirely, and the air through the cracked window went cold and sharp, and full of a clean quality that Nia associated with the specific feeling of being genuinely far from ordinary demands. She watched him drive. She watched his hands on the wheel, which were the hands of a man who was doing something that cost him something. And she said nothing, because she understood the difference between a silence that needed filling and one that needed to be allowed to run its course. The cabin was up a service road that required a vehicle with clearance, which Bach's choice of car for the day had. It sat in a clearing set back from a ridgeline, with a view over the valley that in better weather would have been extraordinary, and in the current overcast afternoon was still something, gray and green and infinite, the sense of the world going on without pause or attention to any specific life contained within it. They brought their bags in. The cabin had been maintained. Someone came up regularly. She could see the evidence of it in the lack of dust on the furniture, the fresh firewood stacked by the stove, the small functional kitchen that was clean and stocked with basics. It had the quality of a place that had been cared for without being lived in, and the distinction between those two things was something she felt immediately and could not fully articulate. Taejun stood in the center of the main room and looked at it. She looked at him. "It's fine," she said. "You can be here. It's fine." He looked at her. "I know," he said. And then, after a moment, "I know." She went to find her chair. There was one, a reading chair near the window that faced the valley, worn in the specific way of furniture that had been genuinely used, its cushion compressed in the exact shape of someone who had sat in it for years. She pulled it closer to the window. She sat down. She took out her book. She could hear Taejun moving behind her. The sounds of someone getting familiar with the space, opening cabinets, checking the stove, the small territorial process of a person establishing their presence in a place. After a while, she heard the sounds stop. She heard him sit down in the other chair. A different one, a larger one closer to the door, the kind of chair a person might choose if they were accustomed to sitting where they could see the entrance. The rain started softly against the windows. Not a hard rain, the mountain kind, patient and even, that settled in for the long work of a full afternoon. They read. The fire Taejun had started in the stove ticked and settled. The rain did what rain does in mountain clearings, filled the air with a specific quality of sound that was more texture than noise, a blanket of white that pressed the world down to the size of this room, this window, this chair. Nia turned a page. From across the room came the sound of Taejun's book, a page turning too loudly, the way it did sometimes when he was reading something that had absorbed him, and the physical management of the book had fallen below his attention. She raised her eyes. He was reading. He did not notice her looking. She looked at him for a moment, at the particular quality of a man at rest, which was a different man from the one who ran a criminal organization across 3 jurisdictions and had spent 38 years learning to keep his guard up against everything he cared about. This version was quieter, not weaker, quieter, the way a sound is quieter when the room it's in has stopped demanding so much from it. She looked back at her book. A while later, he turned another page, too loudly. She looked up. "Quiet," she said. He looked at her. His expression shifted through several things. Awareness of being caught in something, a brief and undefended quality she had seen only a handful of times, and then something that settled at the edges of his mouth that she would not have called a smile a few months ago, but which she had learned since to call exactly that. He smiled. She looked at him for another moment. Then she smiled back. Not the controlled, strategic version she deployed in rooms full of people who were watching, but the real one, the one that used her whole face, the one that her older sisters had always said was the best thing about her, and which she had spent years applying only where it would not be misread. She applied it here. She returned to her book. He returned to his. The rain came down on the roof of the cabin in the Cascades, steady and clean and without agenda, and the fire ticked in the stove, and 2 people read in armchairs across from each other in a room that had been carefully maintained for years by people who cared for it without living in it, and was now, for the first time, inhabited by someone who intended to return. Outside, the valley went gray and green under the overcast sky, and the firs moved in the wet air, and the world continued its particular unpausing work. But inside the cabin, in the chairs, in the quiet between two people who had come through the same storm from opposite sides and found each other still standing on the other end, inside that quiet, nothing was waiting, nothing needed to be. The story had arrived at its ending the only way real endings arrive. Not with the door slamming shut, but with two people turning pages in a warm room, while the rain decided nothing needed to be urgent for a while.